WRC-TV, Washington's community-minded station.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
Good morning. This is today, the second day of our week in Washington, Tuesday, November 4th. And you're looking, of course, at the White House in the early light of autumn in the Capitol. I'm Hugh Downs. Joe Garagiola is here this morning, as is our Washington editor, Bill Monroe. Barbara Walters is off on a film assignment with Tricia Nixon. We'll hear more about that a little later. Since it is voting day, the polls open at different times in different places across the country. But just a reminder to vote. Well, we're spending the entire week here in Washington to bring you a cross-section of the varied activities in the nation's capital to meet some of the people who make this one of the world's most interesting cities. Our first guest is Joe Garagiola. Tell us a little about him, Joe.
Donald Dell, he is the non-playing captain of the U.S. Davis Cup team, and really a breath of fresh air in a sport that is really needed to have the windows open and get some new ideas. And he gets in a little bit of trouble because he's honest and speaks his piece, and we've got some interesting things to ask him.
Look forward to hearing from him. Bill Monroe has lined up two guests in this hour that are pertinent to the events.
We'll have a little bit of reaction later, Hugh, to the president's Vietnam speech last night from Senator Dominic, Republican of Colorado, and Senator Charles Percy, Republican of Illinois. You and I will be talking with them.
And this being Election Day, Ed Newman is going to discuss the critical contest for mayor and governor and other offices being decided around the country. We'll switch back to New York for him. And we'll switch back now to New York and Frank Blair, who brings us the news.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, everyone. President Nixon last night announced what he called a program for the future, the complete withdrawal of all American combat ground forces in Vietnam on a secret timetable. Mr. Nixon said the only alternative would be immediate withdrawal, and that, he said, would lead to a communist massacre in Vietnam, a worldwide loss of confidence in the American character, and eventually more aggression and more wars. In his television address to the nation, the president indicated he had all but written off hope for the Paris peace talks and was relying largely on the effort to Vietnamese the war. He said the only thing the communist negotiators had agreed upon was the shape of the peace table. The president disclosed there had been some secret talks and also that he had sent a personal letter to Ho Chi Minh last July urging serious negotiations and got back a reply which to some readers this morning sounded almost like a form letter restating the communist line. This morning, Mr. Nixon's critics said they regretted his speech had not disclosed new diplomatic initiatives, but his supporters and many moderates said that he had advanced a good explanation of why instant withdrawal was impossible. The president conveyed a clear warning to Hanoi that his secret timetable could be slowed down overnight if the level of enemy battlefront activity is increased.
At the time of the bombing halt, just a year ago, there was some confusion as to whether there was an understanding on the part of the enemy that if we stopped the bombing of North Vietnam, they would stop the shelling of cities in South Vietnam. I want to be sure that there is no misunderstanding on the part of the enemy with regard to our withdrawal program. We have noted the reduced level of infiltration, the reduction of our casualties, and are basing our withdrawal decisions partially on those factors. If the level of infiltration or our casualties increase while we are trying to scale down the fighting, it will be the result of a conscious decision by the enemy. Hanoi could make no greater mistake than to assume that an increase in violence will be to its advantage. If I conclude that increased enemy action jeopardizes our remaining forces in Vietnam, I shall not hesitate to take strong and effective measures to deal with that situation.
Then, appealing for public support for his peace policy, Mr. Nixon said the enemy cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans, he said, can do that.
Let historians not record that when America was the most powerful nation in the world, we passed on the other side of the road and allowed the last hopes for peace and freedom of millions of people to be suffocated by the forces of totalitarianism. And so tonight, to you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans, I ask for your support. I pledged in my campaign for the presidency to end the war in a way that we could win the peace. I have initiated a plan of action which will enable me to keep that pledge. The more support I can have from the American people, the sooner that pledge can be redeemed. For the more divided we are at home, the less likely the enemy is to negotiate at Paris. Let us be united for peace. Let us also be united against defeat. Because let us understand, North Vietnam cannot defeat or humiliate the United States. Only Americans can do that.
Former Vice President Hubert Humphrey, the titular leader of the Democratic Party, said he was sorry Mr. Nixon did not call for a ceasefire. But Robert Griffin, the Republican whip in the Senate, called the speech an act of great courage. Senator George McGovern said it represented what he called the same old tired, discredited policy. Texas Senator John Tower called it a sign to Hanoi that the United States is not going to bug out. George Aiken, the senior Republican in the Senate, said Mr. Nixon disappointed those who expected an overnight miracle. And House Speaker John McCormack said the Nixon plan to disengage was sound, logical, and in our best interests. While the president was speaking, the enemy launched 45 rocket and ground attacks in South Vietnam and made infantry assaults on 4 American bases. 4 Americans were killed. But in Saigon, an official American source said the upsurge of enemy activity did not appear to be sufficient to slow the withdrawal program. The president, inviting further enemy restraint last night, disclosed a 20% cutback in American air attacks. In South Vietnam, it was apparent that the Vietnamization of the air war already was underway. The South Vietnamese had begun the takeover of one of the biggest American air bases in South Vietnam. A report from Wells Hangen in Vietnam.
Nha Trang is the first American air base in Vietnam due to be handed over to the South Vietnamese Air Force. It's also one of the largest. The formal transfer will take place in a few weeks, but Vietnamese pilots and ground crews have already taken over most flying operations. Vietnamese flight controllers will take over all control tower operations from the U.S. Air Force by the middle of next year. The Americans will then serve only as advisors. Flight line maintenance is an all-Vietnamese operation, except for a few American civilian advisors. The Americans say standards of maintenance have improved considerably since the days when the Vietnamese repaired helicopters like motorbikes. President Thieu says it will be a long time before his Air Force can take over from the Americans. But South Vietnam's pilots and ground crews are eager to do more. The Vietnamese Air Force is short of trained men and modern planes, but long on the self-confidence that comes from being an elite volunteer organization. In that respect, it's far removed from this country's big conscript army. Ironically, the Vietnamese may be able to fight the technically complex air war over their own country even before they have to take over the ground fighting. This is Wells Hangen, NBC News, at the Nha Trang Air Base.
In Cambridge, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, trying to maintain law and order on its campus, obtained a court order against violence during a planned demonstration today by an organization of anti-war groups. It was believed that this was the first time a college had taken such action before disorders occurred. MIT President Howard Johnson said it was not a question of stopping protest and dissent, but merely of protecting the rights of the majority of people.
Since universities cannot wholly protect themselves and still remain free and open from major situations, we have asked the whole of society to protect us. For the Institute to function, those who are members of the Institute must be free to come and go without hindrance. They must be free from threats of bodily harm, and their working tools and places must remain unharmed and at their own disposition. It is those rights, which are civil rights common to all of us, and only those rights, that I've asked the court to protect.
Law and order issues dominated most of the election campaigns for mayor, which are being settled at the polls today in about 25 large cities. Virginia and New Jersey both elect governors today. New Jersey also had a referendum on whether to lower the voting age from 21 to 18. And a final note this morning on an impression of the United States as seen by two Soviet cosmonauts after a hectic two-week tour. Georgy Beregovoy and Konstantin Feoktistov said goodbye yesterday with a look at the New York skyline as seen from atop the Empire State Building. And then, summing up, Beregovoy said they had found the American people expansive, energetic, and endowed with friendliness and the love of life. Meanwhile, American astronauts were on a similar goodwill tour in South Korea. A report now from John Rich.
For Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, the return to Seoul was a sentimental journey. Both were coming back to South Korea for the first time since they fought there against the communists in the early 1950s. Korean students and American residents of the country were on hand at the airport. Then the three moon men began their motorcade through decorated arches into the city. The welcome was a warm one. Among Asian nations, the South Koreans today are unquestionably the most pro-American. At the time of the Korean War, such a ticker-tape parade in Seoul would have been impossible. There weren't enough buildings. At City Hall Plaza, Neil Armstrong said a few words. Then Mayor Kim presented them the keys to the city of Seoul. This is John Rich, NBC News, reporting.
That's today's top news. The time is almost 12 minutes after the hour. The weather across the nation has quieted down. Today, the principal area of clouds and precipitation will be over the eastern half of the Midwest and on into the Northeast. There will be light rain ending this morning in upper Illinois and Indiana. Eastern New York, New Jersey, and New England have fog and drizzle this morning and will have scattered showers this afternoon. Frost and freeze warnings for tonight are issued in northern Georgia and Alabama. The plain states, the mountains, the plateau, and the southwest of California will be fair. Coastal California will have some more fog. The Pacific Northwest coast will develop rain, while a small pocket of cooler weather will move across Montana. Now it's 12 and a half after the hour, and back to Washington and Hugh Downs.
You think amateur tennis is still an amateur game? Joe Garagiola is going to discuss that subject in a moment with the captain of the United States Davis Cup team. This is Today on NBC.
Watergate. The place to live in Washington. Watergate. Near everything important with everything you need. For relaxing, pools, fountains, flowers, greenery, and a memorable restaurant. For convenience, all sorts of stores and elevator right away. And for your guests, the Watergate Hotel. And now, Watergate South is underway, the final cooperative apartment building at Watergate. Watergate South, worth looking into now, while you can choose the view you want, floor you want, apartment style that suits you exactly. Prices begin at under $40,000. Watergate, incomparable architecture and view, cooperative ownership benefits, 6% mortgage rate, potential capital gains. Watergate South. Sales office open 7 days a week, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Rock Creek Parkway and Virginia Avenue.
Coffee Rich is for people who hate to run out of things. It's the non-dairy creamer that stays fresh for 3 whole weeks in your refrigerator and keeps fresh frozen for months in your freezer. Coffee Rich is luscious on fresh fruit and cereal. Makes great pancakes and sauces, too. Coffee Rich is for sourdoughs who like things sweet.
Coffee Rich pints and quarts. In your grocer's frozen food case, it's a real find.
Washington is almost exclusively a one-industry city, but occasionally the business of government is overshadowed by some of the other activities here. Washington sports personalities, for example, sometimes give the politicians a hard run for headline space. And Joe Garagiola has one of them with him now. Joe?
Thank you, Hugh. He's a Washington attorney and the non-playing captain of the United States Davis Cup team. And for the first time in 31 years, we won the American Davis Cup and then brought it back and successfully defended it, which is something unusual. I'm talking about Donald Dell. First of all, Donald, what is a non-playing captain of the United States Davis Cup team? Sounds like the starter's card, Indianapolis. How important is it?
Well, I like to think it's important. The players always remind me, however, I'm the non-playing captain. I did play for America in 61, 2, and 3. The non-playing captain, really, I'm not eligible to play in a match. You have to name a four-man team 10 days before the match.
Can you control the players?
Well, in the sense that I handle their scheduling and their training and their preparation, and particularly if we only play one match, that can get important because you try to plan way in advance for that challenge round.
But if a fellow's going bad, you can't pull him like you would a coach with a football team.
Well, you know, tennis is a very individual sport, and if I make a selection, two men to play singles, let's say Ash and Grabner, and they get out there to play, and suddenly one of them has a bad day, it's very difficult. You can't substitute. I sit on the court. The captain actually sits right on the court and can coach.
Now, the Davis Cup, is it an amateur event? And I'm confused. Rod Laver was just voted Player of the Year, and he is a contract professional, and he can't play in the Davis Cup. Arthur Ashe is an independent professional, and he can play in the Davis Cup. Is it an amateur event? Explain it for me.
Well, let me put it this way. For 50 years, it has been a traditionally amateur event. Last year and this year, the United States Lawn Tennis Association and other tennis associations around the world created a new category called a player. A player is a man who makes his living at tennis, such as Arthur Ashe. He is a professional. So to answer your question, the American Davis Cup team this year is probably the most professional team in the history of tennis. So to say that the Davis Cup is amateur or that we don't have pros playing is just not the truth. Unfortunately, many of the conservative wing of many lawn tennis associations don't want to really recognize that these same players that last year might have been playing for $28 a day and subsidized are now making $100,000, $150,000 a year, like Grabner and Ashe, our two leading players, and that they're in fact really professionals. Now, the problem with Laver, to answer your question more specifically, Laver is what they call a contract professional. In other words, I sign a contract with Joe Garagiola and say, Joe, I'll play anywhere you want me to and pay me $100,000 a year. And so you control where and when I play. The real problem is it's a jurisdictional battle between the lawn tennis associations and one or two contract promoters, much the way the NCAA and the AAU are fighting.
Well, why do they get up in a place like Cleveland and call it an amateur event then?
Well, either the man just doesn't really know what he's talking about, and he wants to have these people think it's a great amateur event, and you're playing for your country, which you are, but certainly it is not an amateur event in the sense that all the players are being paid. They're not paid to play that match. Interestingly enough, the Americans played that match. We grossed over $200,000 in Cleveland and went to the Lawn Tennis Association.
But they are paid.
But they are paid all throughout the year, wherever they play.
Don, you're so outspoken. What are your future plans? I'm sure that the U.S. Lawn Tennis Association have plans for you, like getting rid of you. Do you feel that, or is that an unfair question?
No, it's not an unfair question. I'm going back to practice law. I've just opened an office here in Washington. I've loved being captain of the team. I've loved the relationship with the boys. I felt my job when I took over in '67, we had lost to Ecuador.
Which was pretty bad.
Which was probably the biggest tennis upset in the history of the game. We have more tennis players in America than they have people. So I felt my important thing was to win. And I went about it very systematically to try to change the spirit and the direction of this team. I felt winning was the most important thing at this level of competition.
Without the hypocrisy.
Well, I didn't worry about the politics or the hypocrisy. I worried about the players. And that, of course, sometimes you don't mend your political fences. The rule is that the
We're going to run out of time, but I want to say one thing before we do. I thank you for coming here, and if they let you get away, it'd be like firing Lombardi after winning the Super Bowl. They shouldn't let you get away. Because
well, they've done stranger things, Joe.
Well, if they do, they'll have to battle us for it. Right now, I have to tell you, this is Today on NBC.
This is Dan Daniels with the lineup of young furs from Saks 3, the 3 stores of Saks.
Bathurst. Harvey. Link. Fox. Muskrat. Rabbit. Weasel. Bobcat. Pony. Calgon Lamb. Fox Master.
And how about a few words now from the coach?
Oh, why, yes. This is the season we've been waiting for. Young Furs will go undefeated this year. It's all year.
Be on the winning team with a young fur from Saks 3, 610 12th Street Northwest, Connecticut Avenue, and West End.
Nine Lives presents Morris. Ethel, baby, you are something else.
Here, Morris. Din Din.
Din Din, who wants to eat at a time like this?
Morris, are you having one of your finicky spells?
You bet. A cat who doesn't act finicky loses control of his owner. Besides, there's nothing like a great-looking doll to help keep your mind off food.
Morris, come now. It's 9 Lives.
9 Lives? Oh, it could be tuna, liver, kidney, super supper, tuna and egg, chicken parts. Well, mon chéri, you're beautiful, but I'm hungry.
Oh, Morris. Morris, for the last time, come... Oh, there you are, sweetie pie.
Ugh, sweetie pie. The name is Morris.
Here's your Marvy 9 Lives tuna.
9 Lives, the nutritious foods cats really like, even Morris.
This is Election Day, and a year ago today, Richard Nixon was elected president. We've asked today Washington editor Bill Monroe to tell us about the mood of Washington 1 year later. Bill?
Hugh, Washington worries about rapes, burglaries, and holdups. Actually, crime in Washington, while it's heavily publicized, is no worse than it is in many other big cities. But it is increasing, and as far as most people are concerned, there's too much of it for comfort. Washington shakes its head over the city government. Unlike other Western capitals, the people here are not allowed to elect their own city officials. The president appoints them. And on such a local issue as construction of a freeway, Congress forces its preference on the helpless city council. Some of the black majority in the District of Columbia call it an American colony. Washington discusses the troubles of different kinds that can suddenly ambush powerful men. Senator Ted Kennedy, Judge Clement Haynesworth, Speaker John McCormick. Washington argues, as it has for years, about Vietnam. The reports from Saigon are encouraging about Vietnamization and pacification, but they don't guarantee that Hanoi will have to stop fighting. An administration man says that the president is making some progress on Vietnam. A critic replies, yes, Mr. Nixon has a plan that will get us halfway out. Washington speculates about the presidential election coming up exactly 3 years from this week. According to Republicans, Mr. Nixon is successfully bringing the voters along with him on Vietnam, and the newly respected middle American likes to have Vice President Agnew telling off the war protesters. According to Democrats, the president is not making much headway on Vietnam or racial hostility or stagnant cities, and the vice president is manufacturing new Democrats. They believe Mr. Nixon will be vulnerable in '72. But Washington is also like any other city. The ponderous subjects get tiresome. Then it switches to the smaller, more refreshing matters. The performance of Ted Williams and Vince Lombardi, the right time for snow tires, the qualities of good cider, and the red brilliance of the lingering dogwood leaves. Bill Monroe, NBC News, Washington.
Thank you, Bill. You may have watched the president's speech last night and formed your own opinion. We're going to have guests who will talk about the way it struck them. Station break now, though.
Eddie Arnold welcomes Judy Carn, the Lettermen, and Tom Seaver of the New York Mets tomorrow night.
Hi there. I'm Carmelita Pope. Have you tried Pam yet? It's the pure vegetable coating you spray on pots and pans before cooking. Then food won't stick. I spray Pam for everything, and scrambled eggs don't stick. Casseroles don't stick. Roast and gravy won't stick. Cookies don't stick. That's why I say when you pick up a pan, spray it with Pam. Find Pam in the cooking oil section.
D.C. School Board returns on Community Minded 4. Today in Washington with Don Doak is being brought to you by Pepco, providing the power to help you live better electrically.
Good morning. It's 48 degrees at 725. Variable cloudiness and cooler today in Washington, the high about 60. As many as 750,000 Virginians are expected to vote in the election today. Focus is on the race for the governor's chair, which pits Republican candidate Linwood Holton against Democrat William Battle in the Virginia GOP's most serious challenge to Democratic control of the State House in nearly 100 years. Also up for election in Virginia are the posts of Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, all 100 seats in the House of Delegates, and the public offices in most cities. Polls in Virginia opened at 6 this morning and close at 7 tonight. It is also Election Day in the District of Columbia. Voters will choose candidates to fill 5 seats on the D.C. School Board. A last-minute decision by the Court of Appeals permits write-ins for prospective candidates not on the ballot. Polls in the district open at 8 this morning and close at 8 tonight. Opponents of the controversial Three Sisters Bridge over the Potomac River plan to have ballots available at the city's 128 precincts for a rump referendum. The Senate District Committee, chaired by Senator Joseph Tidings of Maryland, has approved part of President Nixon's anti-crime legislation after making substantial changes in it. The new version, among other things, would make it more difficult for police to use wiretaps and to enter premises of suspects without first knocking. Criticism from Attorney General Mitchell earlier for the delay in acting on the president's crime bill drew a response yesterday from Senator Tidings.
We had to postpone our hearings literally for months because of the delay in the Department of Justice coming forward with their proposals. They made a lot of speeches and a lot of messages, but they didn't have anything concrete. Now, I don't think the problem of crime and law enforcement should be political. I don't think Attorney General Mitchell or anyone else should make it that way. Certainly the President isn't. The President is approaching it from the proper fashion. It's bipartisan. It's all of our problems. We have to work together. But certainly today is an indication that we're doing our job. As a matter of fact, I challenge the Attorney General to show me any committee in the last 10 years that has moved with the speed and the expedition and the overall comprehensive scope that we have on the crime legislative proposals which we have received and which, indeed, we've initiated ourselves.
Tidings says he hopes the House will act quickly on the legislation. District police have charged an official of the Home Loan Bank Board with homicide in the fatal shooting of his boss. Shot and killed yesterday in his office was Clark Fawver, 54, of Silver Spring, director of the Home Loan Bank operations. Charged with the shooting is Samuel Welch, 63, of Alexandria. Police say Welch, an assistant to Fawver, had been told to find another job. Washington's weather forecast after this for Pepco. Weather outlook for metropolitan Washington, variable cloudiness and cooler today, the high about 60. Cooler tonight with a chance of showers, low about 40. Wind out of the north-northwest at 5 miles an hour. There the sun and the tides. Chance of rain 20% today, going up to 30% tonight. Right now it's 48 degrees, the humidity 77%. This is Don Doak. In a moment back to the Today Show, which is originating in Washington.
Stay tuned at 8:25 this morning for Jim Vance with Today in Washington.
We know how it is to cook something different. It's scary. So Chef Boyardee made 4 scary rice dinners easy. Braised beef, beef marinara, chicken paprika, and chicken with mushrooms aren't scary. Each one's a complete dinner with rice, seasonings, and beef for chicken and sauce. 4 scary rice dinners made easy by Chef Boyardee, your friend.
Full election coverage on Community Minded 4.
Good morning again. It's 30 minutes after the hour now on this Tuesday, November 4th. This is Today. I'm Hugh Downs. Bill Monroe, our Washington editor, and Joe Garagiola with me this morning. We're all in Washington. Frank Blair is in New York, and we'll bring you the news in just a few moments. The voting booths may be opening soon or may already have opened in your community, and you have your opportunity to exercise your franchise. Joe has sports notes for us in just a few moments, and Bill Monroe has brought 2 guests. Tell us a little about them, Bill. We'll be talking to him.
We'll be hearing from Senator Dominic of Colorado and from Senator Percy of Illinois, both Republicans with a special interest in Vietnam policy, get an idea of what they thought about the president's speech.
Later, Ed Newman gives us an analysis of the critical elections that are being decided at the polls today. So we'll get 2 things by calling on Frank Blair first and switching to New York for the news.
Thanks, Hugh. Good morning, everyone. President Nixon last night announced that he has a secret timetable for the withdrawal of American combat forces from Vietnam, and at the same time indicated he has all but abandoned hope for the Paris peace talks. He said U.S. withdrawal would be geared to the Vietnamization of the war, but would be slowed if there's any significant increase in enemy battlefront activity. In his television address to the nation, the president said the communist peace negotiators had been intransigent both in open and in secret exchanges, and he said instant withdrawal from Vietnam would have meant a communist bloodbath and an invitation to future communist aggression and future wars. After appealing for public support, the president said some honest and patriotic Americans disapprove of his policies. But unless the majority will prevails, the country will have no future as a free society.
I recognize that some of my fellow citizens disagree with the plan for peace I've chosen. Honest and patriotic Americans have reached different conclusions as to how peace should be achieved. In San Francisco, a few weeks ago, I saw demonstrators carrying signs reading, "Lose in Vietnam, bring the boys home." Well, one of the strengths of our free society is that any American has a right to reach that conclusion and to advocate that point of view. But as President of the United States, I would be untrue to my oath of office if I allowed the policy of this nation to be dictated by the minority who hold that point of view and who try to impose it on the nation by mounting demonstrations in the street. For almost 200 years, the policy of this nation has been made under our Constitution by those leaders in the Congress and the White House elected by all the people. If a vocal minority, however fervent its cause, prevails over reason and the will of the majority, this nation has no future as a free society.
In Saigon this morning, South Vietnam's President Thieu expressed total agreement with the president and said that he wanted nothing more than gradually to take over full responsibility for the war. We will have congressional reaction from Washington here on the Today program later in this half hour. In the Middle East, Israel warned Lebanon to expect swift retaliation for any attacks against Israel launched from Lebanese soil. The warning came after a new agreement between Lebanon and Arab guerrillas permitting the guerrillas freedom of movement in unspecified areas of Lebanon. At the same time, Egyptian military sources reported that Israeli planes flew over Cairo during the night but were driven off by the city's air defenses. In Washington, Senator Frank Moss of Utah today asked the Food and Drug Administration why it had not ended the use in government hospitals of some drugs which the FDA had ruled dangerous and ineffective. Moss said testimony before his Consumer Subcommittee indicated at least 4 such drugs were still being stocked. A spokesman for the FDA commented, "We have made all the information available, and that's all we can do." Also in Washington, 17 congressmen sent a letter to President Nixon urging that he ban the use of the pesticide DDT except in emergency situations. They said studies have turned up evidence that DDT can cause cancer. And in Ottawa, the Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau told the House of Commons that his government planned measures which would reduce the use of DDT by 90% next year. Briefly, that's the news. It's now 35 after the hour. Hugh?
Thank you, Frank. Right now, you're going to see another reason why Jergens lotion is #1 in softness. Watch.
I believe I have something here that you will find more suitable. This is a pear shape, 2.5 carat with 2 baguettes. I think you'll find it lovely. You have lovely hands. She has lovely hands.
Thank you.
Very nice. They're so beautiful. Oh. So soft.
More engagement rings are slipped onto hands softened by Jergens lotion than anything else. In fact, more successful women soften their hands with Jergens than the next 6 lotions put together. Shouldn't you be using the soft one?
Beautiful hands. So soft.
If it hurts your skin to open this jar, you've come to the right place. New Jergens hand cream has healing ingredients. It is actually guaranteed to leave hands softer after only 1 application or your money back. New Jergens hand cream.
Now we'll go back to Frank Blair for a look at the weather.
Today, the weather is on the quiet side, at least in comparison to what it has been like these past few weeks. The main area of clouds and precipitation will be over the eastern half of the Midwest on into the northeastern states. Light rain will be ending this morning in northern Illinois and Indiana and lasting through the day from lower Michigan and Ohio into West Virginia, western Pennsylvania, and western New York. Eastern New York, New Jersey, and New England have fog and some drizzle, with the chances of showers this afternoon. A rather cold pool of air is over the Mississippi Valley and the Midwest, and it's moving towards the southeastern states. Frost and freeze warnings are out for tonight in upper Alabama and Georgia. There have been frosts or freezes this morning as far south as Louisiana and southeast Texas. Northern Michigan has been having snow with 1 inch on the ground early this morning. From the plain states to the mountains, the plateau, the southwest, and California, today will be fair and mild. Coastal California will have fog, while rain will touch the Pacific Northwest. A small cooler air mass will be crossing Montana. The temperature map for this election day afternoon shows a large pocket of chilly air over the Midwest and Mississippi Valley areas, with readings in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. 60s will occur on the Atlantic coastal plain to the Gulf, on up into the western plains and the plateau. 70s and 80s are in short supply today, staying in Florida and in California. And now the time is 37.5 after the hour. Hugh?
Yes, if you take a game of tic-tac-toe, a boy, his father, and some Stouffer's macaroni and cheese, you've got the next commercial. Watch.
And I think I'm going to go in there. Stumped.
At Stouffer's, we could use cheese that costs a few cents less per pound.
Right there. Well, if I go there. Too easy. Now you're ahead of me there. Okay.
Stouffer's could use only 1 kind of cheese instead of 2.
Okay, I think I'll go in there. Right there.
Stouffer's could use powdered milk instead of fresh milk.
Ah, I see. I better go over here to block you.
Or take a few shortcuts.
Right there. I won.
You did?
I did.
You beat me again.
But Stouffer's doesn't do any of that. You can taste all the good things together in Stouffer's frozen macaroni and cheese.
That's pretty good.
For the people you love, Stouffer's plays it straight.
Okay, Joe has sports notes for us now.
Okay, Hugh, one of the players who made possible the New York Mets World Series win, outfielder Tommy Agee, has agreed to terms for next season. His pay reportedly will be some $37,000. This will be a raise of about $12,000. Agee said he and the front office had no trouble arriving at an understanding. As Tommy put it, there was no quibbling because I got what I wanted. And that's the best way to avoid trouble, get what you want. In golf, Jack Nicklaus picked up $28,000 yesterday by winning the sudden death playoff of the Kaiser Open tournament in Napa, California. It was his 3rd win on the tour this year, and it was his 2nd in a row. Big Bear is coming back. Football, a spokesman for the National Football League reported the league is investigating charges that the Green Bay Packers violated league rules Sunday when they substituted Don Horn for Bart Starr as starting quarterback without reporting publicly before the game that Starr wasn't well enough to play. Starr had a sore arm, a sore neck, and a couple other ailments. And a baseball note, an old friend, Harry Peanuts Lowry, is back with the Chicago Cubs after being away for more than a quarter of a century. He was hired as a coach by the Cubs. In 1940, Peanuts was an outfielder with the Chicago Cubs. And that's a look at sports. Not much going on. Right now, a word about a little girl whose word you can take for salt.
Now, you're someone I know. I know. Even though you are just a little girl, I can depend on you. Or just look at yourself. For as long as I've known you, you've been walking around in the rain like that just to prove when it rains, it pours. And it did, and it does, and you're cute.
42 million women know they can take this little girl's word for salt. Morton, there's no better word for it.
The 24-hour bug. When he hits your stomach, he makes you miserable. Nothing can make him go away, but something can make him easier to live with. Pepto-Bismol liquid. Pepto-Bismol's coating action soothes the nausea and relieves the upset that makes you feel so awful. Take Pepto-Bismol liquid until the bug stops bugging you.
In just a few seconds, Republican Senators Percy and Dominic will be with us to talk about their reactions to President Nixon's Vietnam speech of last evening. We'll take that station break now.
A casual motorcycle ride turns into a dangerous battle for Bronson tomorrow night.
James, my clothes.
Yes, sir? James uses the Norge 18, biggest size dryer made.
Coming, sir.
Big enough to keep the wrinkles out of permanent press. Doesn't cost more. No ironing. Just dry and wear.
Magnificent ironing job. James, you're indispensable. You're indispensable.
See the Norge 18 at Capitol Furniture and Appliance, Washington, and all Curtis Brothers stores. Follow Virginia elections with Community-Minded 4.
We've asked two Republican senators with special interest in our Vietnam policy to talk with us at this time about President Nixon's speech last night. Senator Peter Dominic of Colorado, a member of the Armed Services Committee, is one of them. The other is Senator Charles Percy of Illinois, who's been both a supporter and a critic. In effect, he has urged the White House to go a little faster in scaling down the war. And joining me for the interview is today Washington editor Bill Monroe. Welcome, gentlemen. Bill and I have questions for you, but we thought first if we could get your general reaction to the president's speech last night from each of you. Senator Dominic?
Yes, I think the build-up on the speech was unfortunate from the point of view of public expectation that we were going to have something very dramatic. But I think the president's sincerity and the fact of what he had been doing in changing the political initiative to try and get peace and in terms of decelerating the actual fighting itself came through very strongly. And I would suspect that the vast majority of people are going to say to the president in response to his speech, okay, fine, you've got a program, you've got a plan, let's see if it doesn't work. And that this will calm down that group. It will not calm down some of the more explosive characters who want to pull out now.
Senator Percy.
To the extent, I think, that the war does not end tomorrow, or even better, today or yesterday, I think the American people will be disappointed and the world will be disappointed. We want this war to end, and no one wants it to end more than the president. But I have steadily supported the direction that the president is carrying our effort. He is de-escalating. He is not seeking a military solution. He has cut back our troop forces by 60,000, and he has cut back the bombing and brought the level of killings to the lowest level in 3 years. I'd just like to see the direction continued, accelerated, and I would like to see us try a total cessation of all bombing, all shelling, and all hostile ground activity, with our troops ordered to defend themselves and do whatever is necessary to defend themselves. But I think I'd like to dramatically see us demonstrate to the world we want to end this war. Now, what will Hanoi do in response?
Speaking of what Hanoi will do in response, in the speech, President Nixon indicated that the timing of his plan to end the war will be dependent, to some extent, on Hanoi's behavior. Now, won't the critics of his policy now say that Hanoi is calling the terms rather than the United States?
They already have said that. In fact, I was on last night with some people discussing this, and One man said, Hanoi is going to call it this way, and if you say that you're going to first get prior approval from South Vietnam, that means South Vietnam is determining what we're going to do. I don't think either one of these are legitimate. What we're trying to do and what we're trying to say, and what the President, I think, brought out quite clearly, is the fact that we're going to get our ground troops out as rapidly as we can, consistent with the territorial integrity of South Vietnam. If we can do that and do it as rapidly as we can, then we're back into an aspect of this struggle, which I think is the one that we should have been in to begin with, long before we put any ground troops in.
Don't we still face the prospect, Senator Dominic and Senator Percy, that if Hanoi doesn't make the concessions we're after, we may still be in South Vietnam, even pulling the ground troops out with 100,000 to 200,000 men for several more years at least?
I wouldn't think so, no. As far as I'm concerned, I don't know what Chuck feels, but I would say that as far as I'm concerned, if we have the technological superiority in the air and in the sea, you don't need 100 or 200,000 troops in order to take care of that. We can provide that superiority and assistance to the South Vietnamese and get our ground troops out.
Senator Percy? If the President last night had announced another 100,000 drawdown of American forces, this would have been dramatic news. I wonder whether Peter Dominic wouldn't agree that the President would really feel that schedule could be substantially accelerated if Hanoi will lessen the hostilities and if they'll show any intention to negotiate. I don't think he wanted to set a time schedule because he wants to get out at the most rapid rate possible. And yet that would have made news. And yet he'd sooner have 200,000 or 300,000 out if we can get any kind of response. But what he must do is protect his forces in South Vietnam. And any announced schedule would undercut the Paris peace talks and might set up a schedule that would not enable him to do what he must do, protect those forces in Vietnam.
Is the hope in the Paris peace talks, perhaps in the minds of many, inordinate? The President himself last night said that there'd been no agreement except on the shape of the table. So what do the Paris peace talks mean?
I think that they're the first tangible evidence that we've got that there is a body there that you can try to negotiate with. If they don't get any further than they've gotten up to date, we haven't lost anything by the negotiations other than the hope that we had that other people might be reasonable. The advantage I think we've got is to show that we have been willing to negotiate with them, that we wanted to continue this, that we wanted to get a peace, and that the fact that we haven't gotten one should be laid at their doorstep and not at ours. For a long period of time, as you know, many people overseas, our allies and our enemies and the neutrals, felt that it was our fault. I don't think that that feeling is nearly as explicit anymore.
I just talked with Ambassador Lodge and Mr. Habib in Paris 10 days, 2 weeks ago. Spent several hours with them. And there has not been progress there, and yet I certainly would feel the world would be disappointed if we weren't there. You can always hope, and our history of negotiations with the communists through the years has been that they are very intransigent up to a point. And then suddenly, in many cases, something has happened. And we can just only hope that something will happen. They're there. We hope they're there in good faith. And we always have presented the posture that we will reasonably negotiate in flexible terms. We're not rigid in those terms. But we do want to see progress at the other end as well. It can't be all one-sided. To negotiate, you have to have negotiation from both sides. So the progress there depends upon Hanoi and the progress of our troop withdrawal. And this was the clear signal the President gave last night. They can accelerate our troop drawdown if they will de-escalate the level of hostility and the killing right today. And they could start the process of speed up if they want to.
Is there any evidence in your mind of that already happening with the lessening of the casualties now in Vietnam? That in other words, that Hanoi may be...
I think the sign is very clear. After all, the President has made it clear that the infiltration has cut down 75 to 80%. The level of engagement is down substantially. I'm not so sure they're ever going to say, we are de-escalating. And this is why I think we have to take every sign, accept it for its most optimistic viewpoint, guarding our forces, but then be dramatic and bold and take some risks for peace. as long as you're protecting the forces that are there, and perhaps dramatically cut all shelling and all bombing and all hostile ground activity to see if we can get even a further response.
One of the things that interests me is President Nixon really has done everything that the minority plank in the Democratic platform suggested and gone beyond it. The one thing that he hasn't done, which many of the demonstrators have asked that he do, is to withdraw unilaterally. And yet not a single one of the leaders in that drive in the convention by the Democrats ever suggested that, and they don't suggest it now. As a matter of fact, Senator McCarthy said the other day that it was irresponsible for a unilateral withdrawal. So I think we can show that what we've done is to take these dramatic steps towards decelerating and cutting the fuse on the war as much as possible, and we still haven't gotten any response.
Is there any difference between President Nixon's goal in Vietnam and President Johnson's goal in Vietnam?
Well, I don't think that we should try and figure out what President Johnson's goal was, because it got all tangled up with the question of tactics. The fact that both of them have the objective of maintaining territorial integrity called South Vietnam, I think is the principal thing that we've been trying to shoot for.
I think even more productive would be your point, Peter, that the minority plank, headed by Senator McCarthy and Senators McGovern, did have a goal. I wrote down the goal. With such a program, we will have attained our only legitimate objective in South Vietnam, the self-determination of the South Vietnamese people. So their goal and President Nixon's goal is identical. And as Peter Dominic has said, the President Nixon, has fulfilled most of the planks in the minority platform of the Democratic Party, when before they had not been fulfilled, in fact rejected by the Democratic Party. So great progress is being made by the President.
Thank you very much, Senator Percy, Senator Dominic, for being with us this morning. Right now, at 8 minutes before the hour, we have a message for you from Parker Brothers on 2 games. Watch this. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Introducing Soma, the cube puzzle game. One challenge is rebuilding the cube. It can be done in more than 1 million ways, right? For other challenges, take the booklet and with the same 7 pieces, solve the pyramid, the zigzag wall, or this, or this. With Soma, you solve lots of puzzles. It's another brain game from Parker Brothers. Now, didn't you find those Soma puzzles easy?
Well, Soma do and Soma don't.
This is Funny Bones, a game for people who love to laugh. You pick up a card and do what it says, like the hand bones connected to the backbone, or the nose bones connected to the nose bone, or the hand bones connected to the knee bone. You do what it says as long as you can. A Parker Brothers game called Funny Bones, for people who love to laugh.
Today is Election Day in thousands of United States cities and towns, and although most of them are local municipal contests, many have national significance because the urban issues involved concern the vast majority of Americans. We've asked NBC correspondent Edwin Newman to give us an overall view of the elections, and Ed is in Washington right now.
As off-year elections go, the ones today are of unusual significance. It's tempting to say that about all elections, but this time it's true. One reason is that 2 of the best-known mayors in the country are up for re-election. John Lindsay in New York, a much-embattled figure, and Carl Stokes in Cleveland, first black man to be mayor of a major American city. Another reason is that the elections will tell a great deal about how our cities intend to go about curing themselves of their well-publicized ailments, provided, of course, that they intend to cure themselves at all. There are 2 governorships at stake also. Let's deal with them first. In New Jersey, former Governor Robert Minor, on the left, is running against Representative William Cahill, a Republican. It has been an uninspired campaign full of charges of conflict of interest. For the nation, the chief interest is that New Jersey is the last big northern industrial state with a Democratic governor. If Cahill wins, the Democrats will be shut out of the industrial north. In Virginia, Democrat William Battle at the left and Republican Linwood Holton are the major candidates for governor. Both are considered moderate, and the contest is thought to be close, so there's a possibility that Virginia will have a Republican governor. It has not had one since 1886. About the cities, in New York, John Lindsay, left, running as a liberal and an independent, faces Mario Procaccino, center, Democrat, and John Markey, Republican, on the right. Voter registration in New York is 7/9 Democrat, and Lindsay appeared to be doomed a few months ago, especially since he'd lost in his own Republican primary. But the campaign has evidently changed things. A fairly peaceful summer, and the New York Mets helped. Lindsay had his picture taken often with Prime Minister Meir of Israel when she was in New York, and he is now the heavy betting favorite. If he does win, he'll be a national figure of some size. In Cleveland, Mayor Stokes, a Democrat on the left, is opposed by Ralph Perk, a Republican who's the auditor of Cuyahoga County and who's done much talking about law and order. The assumption is that substantially all Negro voters will stand with Stokes. The outcome will therefore depend on the percentage of white voters who want to give him a second term after a troubled first one. In Detroit, the contest was between Roman Gribbs, the sheriff of Wayne County on the left, and Richard Austin, the auditor of Wayne County. Both are Democrats, but Gribbs has been getting useful Republican help. Gribbs, like Perk in Cleveland, has talked a good deal about law and order. As in Cleveland also, the assumption is that blacks will vote overwhelmingly for Austin. The question for him is how many white voters he can pick up. There are other important races for mayor in Pittsburgh, Seattle, Buffalo, Hartford, Houston, and Louisville. Earlier elections this year in Los Angeles and Minneapolis had law and order men coming out ahead. By this time tomorrow, we'll know whether that trend continues, and we should also know a lot more than we do now about the national mood. Edwin Newman, NBC News, New York.
Thank you, Ed, who is in New York. I'm so used to switching to Washington. I didn't realize Ed was, I said to Washington. We've had in this hour 2 Republican senators to talk about their reactions to President Nixon's speech last night. In our other hour, Democratic Senate leader Mike Mansfield will be on to talk about his reaction. I didn't quite expect as much unanimity of opinion about the speech as we got from Senators Dominic and Percy. But I thought maybe if we had talked a little longer, we might have heard what elements might have disappointed them about the speech, if
Senator
any.
Percy seemed to be trying hard not to express any disappointment in the president's speech. On the basis of his past record, he must have felt a little.
That's what we were looking for. We'll be interested to hear what Mike Mansfield has to say about that. In just a few seconds, we'll have to duck out for a moment. Joe Garagiola and Bill Monroe and myself will be back for many of you in another hour. We want to mention that on First Tuesday tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, there'll be reports about election returns across the nation, so you want to, and then a special NBC television network special with Frank McGee at 11:30. Station break now.
The fact that they lost one space capsule early in the space program, the second flight downrange by Gus Grissom, when he was...
Coverage on community-minded Ford. See the complete new line of 1970 Fords on display at Herbie's Ford in Alexandria. And remember, nobody beats Herbie's low prices on Fords.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
Good morning. Today is Tuesday, November 4, and we're in Washington, as you can see by the simple elegance of the White House. Inside our Washington studios, we have today editor Bill Monroe, Washington editor, and Joe Garagiola, Barbara Walters.